Here we are deep in June 1985 on Famicom, but it kind of feels like October 1985 on NES, you know? This week we have games that would eventually become familiar to NES fans, but as we've so often seen, they land differently on Famicom thanks to the two systems' very different release schedules. Take, for example, Wrecking Crew. When NES launched, this was the weird, slow Mario game where he couldn't jump. By summer 1986, when the system entered nationwide distribution, NES owners had plenty of Mario adventures to choose from. Donkey Kong, Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros., and this, which didn't even advertise itself as a Mario game. The Famicom release also didn't present itself as a Mario game, mind you. This cartridge bore the title Wrecking Crew in all regions. Otherwise, though, it does feel a lot less out of place in the Famicom chronology. For starters, that box art does a much better job of broadcasting the idea that, hey, it's Mario, just look at that great illustration on the front cover. Mario didn't have quite the same superstar status in summer 1985 that he does now, but Famicom fans nevertheless would have recognized him. And I have to think his oversized schnoz would have been a welcome sight. Wrecking Crew had to stand out against several other Mario-based games on NES when it launched, but on Famicom, this was the character's first proper outing since Mario Bros., nearly 2 years earlier. It's hard to imagine a 2-year drought of Mario games in this day and age, yet here we are in 1985 with the first proper outing for Mario and Luigi in ages. Even if you want to be generous and count pinball, tennis, and golf as Mario games, all of those games shipped more than a year prior to Wrecking Crew. What I'm saying here is that rather than being a weird blip in the early NES library, Wrecking Crew arrived on Famicom as more of a favorite character's return to form. Or maybe a continuation of form. Mario had remained fairly active on the Game & Watch scene since around the time Famicom had launched, appearing in a variety of portable games including Mario's Cement Factory, Mario's Bombs Away, Donkey Kong Hockey, Donkey Kong Circus, and of course as the villain in both Donkey Kong 2 and Donkey Kong Jr. Wrecking Crew fits perfectly into this lineage. In summer 1985, Mario had not yet become a picaresque princess-saving adventurer with a hate-on for little mushroom guys. He was a jack of all trades, still embodying creator Shigeru Miyamoto's vision of the all-purpose protagonist Mr. Video. Taking a turn as a demolitions expert hardly felt out of place for a guy whose CV to that point included turns as an explosive ordnance disposal specialist, a construction worker, a circus ringmaster, and a pinball paddle. But even more than that, Mario frequently shared top billing with, or even played the proverbial second banana, to Donkey Kong. In the year 2022, the Donkey Kong Hockey Game & Watch absolutely would have been branded Mario Hockey, and rather than being a face-off against the two arcade nemeses, it would have included Kong as one of several additional characters, if at all. But at this point, Donkey Kong's coin-op legacy still cast a long shadow over Nintendo's business, and most Mario-related projects to that point could trace some element of their creative legacy to that global blockbuster. That would change very soon, but here in June 1985, Wrecking Crew absolutely feels like a Donkey Kong descendant. Here we have Mario, and optionally Luigi, zipping along the bones of a construction project while being harassed by an invincible foe who tries to trip them up at every step. You get the impression that the villain, Foreman Spike, would have been Donkey Kong if only Nintendo's development team could have figured out how to get such an enormous character sprite to work on the hardware. With the help of advanced mapper chips that would come along a few years later, they might actually have been able to pull it off. Talent-wise as well, Wrecking Crew descends from the arcade Donkey Kong legacy. While Shigeru Miyamoto is nowhere to be seen on the game's credit list, despite being the guy who came up with Mario in the first place, the producer of the DK series and overlord of the Game & Watch line also produced Wrecking Crew, Gunpei Yokoi. Heading up design, we have Yoshio Sakamoto, who cut his teeth at Nintendo on Donkey Kong Jr. Together, the two helped infuse into Wrecking Crew both a claim for authenticity and a decidedly offbeat feel compared to what we think of as the canon of Mario. Admittedly, neither Mario nor Luigi can leap here, though as in Donkey Kong, ladders and hammers do factor heavily into the action. Now Mario has learned to climb ladders while wielding a hammer, though he no longer uses a hammer as a weapon. Instead, his hammer exists to allow him to smash up passive objects that his crew, meaning himself and his brother, need to wreck in order to tear down 100 different buildings and make way for one of the most epic gentrification projects of all time. You can't use the hammer to hurt enemies, which consist of both form and spike, and things like animate wrenches, though you can pop them across layers of the screen to send them plummeting to the bottom of the structure. Each of the 100 stages in Wrecking Crew presents a puzzle you need to solve by breaking blocks in the correct order while avoiding marauding tools and an angry boss. Mini puzzles can quite easily set you into a no-win scenario, at which point you need to quit out and restart. But since you can choose to jump into any of the game's 100 levels from the outset, this is not especially taxing. You can also create your own levels, which is a feature that was carried over imperfectly to the NES version. In this, we have another way that Wrecking Crew carries forward Mario's growing legacy on Famicom. The Japanese version can easily save to the family basic data recorder tape drive Nintendo had shipped a year before this game's debut, allowing you to record your own custom puzzles. It's worth mentioning that Mario had also put in a post-Mario Bros. Appearance in Family Basic, appearing among the built-in sprite objects Hudson, and specifically Master Tomoyuki Takahashi, had programmed into the cartridge. So yeah, Wrecking Crew feels a lot more explicable here in its Famicom context than on NES. It's a decent game either way, but it works better here. It's basically Nintendo's attempt to create their own load runner alike from Mario elements, which makes a very pretty compelling argument here on Famicom in the summer of 1985. Of course, Mario had far more interesting things in his future than merely chasing Hudson's success, but that was still a few months away. Konami's back, and this time they've got a message for you. Be kind to your controller. Hyper Olympic should be familiar to viewers of this channel, as it's closely related to Hyper Sports for SG-1000 and Track and Field for NES, both of which I've already gone over in detail. This is not quite either of those games. Actually, despite the similar titles and some dudes with big noses and mustaches, Hyper Olympic has almost nothing in common with Hyper Sports. Where the latter game resembled an Epix title like Summer Games or Winter Games with its emphasis on opaque timing and finesse, Hyper Olympic takes the opposite tack by presenting you with events that consist of hammering buttons as quickly as possible. In fact, Konami hits us here with the first ever third-party peripheral for Famicom, at least that I'm aware of, a specialized controller designed specifically to let two players hammer the hell out of their buttons. The Hypershot controller is one of the most interesting and limited controllers I've ever seen, a bespoke interface that works for this game and basically nothing else. Konami designed the Hypershot controller as a set of two permanently daisy-chained boxes that connect to the Famicom's expander port. Each of the two boxes consists of nothing but a housing for two buttons. No start or select button, no D-pad, and definitely no controller to mic. No, the Hypershot exists for one purpose and one purpose alone, to allow you to beat the hell out of your controller without damaging the console. Remember, the Famicom shipped with its two controllers hardwired into the machine. Those integrated controllers were pretty small too, and the original batch of Famicoms featured soft, square rubber A and B buttons. All of this would make for a miserable way to play a home conversion of Track and Field, to be sure. And I think Konami probably hoped to hedge its bets here too. If a bunch of kids ruined their hardwire Famicom controllers playing Hyper Olympic, that would not exactly endear those consumers to this up-and-coming publisher. So they created the Hypershot and even sold it in a bundle with this game. So thoughtful. And also, so limited in purpose. I honestly can't think of a single other use case for this device. So maybe this gadget is even more finite in its utility than Nintendo's upcoming boondoggle for the summer of 1985, the Famicom Robot, but at least it's very nearly as novel. Now, even if the Hypershot could plug into an American or European NES, which it can't, it wouldn't work for the international releases of this game, which shipped as Track and Field. In arcades, Track and Field contained 6 events. On NES, it contained 8. This Famicom card, however, contains only 4, all of which were taken from the arcade version. Presumably due to storage limitations on this early era's cartridges, Konami excised the Hammer Toss and High Jump events. The events that do appear here consist entirely of simple button mashers, pound the buttons to run, then release, unlike some of the additional events in Track and Field for NES, which demand a touch more finesse. And that's okay. There's a certain purity of design and action on display here, and it works. The Famicom has surprisingly been incredibly light on sports games to this point, and Hyper Olympic adopts a very different style and approach to sports than Nintendo's own athletic titles did, which have comprised the bulk of the system's sports library. And it comes with a very silly controller that will prevent you from breaking your console. All in all, a very good release from Konami. They're shaping up to be some real menches. Now, where was Shigeru Miyamoto while Gunpei Yokoi was turning Mario into a demolitions worker? He was here turning Jackie Chan into a video game hero. Spartan-X is of course the Irem martial arts game that the rest of the world knows as Kung Fu or Kung Fu Master. Except this version isn't an Irem game, but rather a Nintendo game, despite the asterisk on the US packaging. This turn of events came as a sour surprise to Irem, whose development teams had intended to make their debut on Famicom with this release. Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi had other ideas, however, and he approached Irem about licensing the rights to this home conversion themselves. According to Scott Tsumura, who ran Irem's arcade division at the time and had his eyes set on the burgeoning home market, his team had declined Nintendo's offer so that Tsumura's group could handle the project internally. Of course, anyone who knows anything about Hiroshi Yamauchi knows that he was not the kind of person who took kindly to rejection. Yamauchi went straight over Tsumura's head directly to the company's top brass and forged an agreement for Nintendo to publish Kung Fu. The end result worked out well for home consumers who ended up getting a great conversion of the game delivered by seasoned Famicom developers rather than an arcade team's first attempts to come to terms with the limited hardware. It did not go over so well with that particular arcade team. This would have repercussions down the road, but for the moment, here's Spartan-X, and it rules. Spartan-X on Famicom is identical to Kung Fu for NES. This would become one of the standout releases at the NES launch, the kind of thing store displays would put on demo instead of Super Mario Bros. So here on Famicom, where Spartan-X debuts a few months before Super Mario, you have to imagine that it looks even more impressive. Clean visuals, smooth scrolling, and far more convincing martial combat action than Konami had delivered with Yar Kung Fu, Spartan-X absolutely raises the bar for Famicom software. And why wouldn't it? The original arcade title revolutionized the concept of melee combat in video games. Along with Jordan Mechner's Karateka, you can pretty much look at the mechanics that future Street Fighter creator Takashi Nishiyama established here and see the shape that beating up other dudes in video games would adopt for decades to come. Combine that excellent source material with the instinct for refinement and appealing gameplay for which Shigeru Miyamoto has become known, and you have a clear winner. Yes, Yamauchi clearly took a serious view of this release. In addition to pulling some political strings to land its license, he also assigned it to his top guy. Now, Miyamoto wasn't the only developer on this project. He also had Koji Kondo handling the audio. Kondo was still a newcomer on the Nintendo team at this point, but he went all in here. Besides adapting the arcade version's ditties to the Famicom sound chip, he also stuffed the game full of voice samples. Far more than we've heard in any other game on the system to this point. And, as the programmer pulling all of this together, we had Toshihiko Nakago of Systems Research and Development, or SRD, who had basically been the invisible hand behind most of Nintendo's first-party releases to this point. Now here in 2022, Nintendo has recently acquired SRD to become a first-party studio. But for nearly 40 years, SRD has been an external second party of sorts, akin to Intelligent Systems. While the Famicom programming work that Satoru Iwata of HAL Laboratory performed under contract for Nintendo sees the most lip service from historians, including myself, Nakago was the Famicom's true MVP. He worked on Famicom conversions from the start. According to credit listings at Moby Games and Kyoto Report and other sites, he began by programming the system's 3 launch titles, and went on to handle the majority of other first-party releases we've seen to this point. Spartan-X arrives about 3 months before his magnum opus. But between the slick scrolling routines of both this game and December 1984's Excitebike, you get the sense that Nakago and Miyamoto were laying the groundwork, deliberately or otherwise, for Super Mario Bros. Anyway, Spartan-X for Famicom stands out as a Famicom release truly worth celebrating by everyone. Well, except maybe for the Irem team. No one likes to have their thunder stolen. Next time on NES Works Gaiden, take a shot. 16 shots.